All right, Imam Khalid, assalamu alaikum. How you doing?
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullah, brother Musab. I'm doing fine. How are you this evening?
Alhamdulillah. Got a few items we need to discuss. A couple things I wanted to run by you, just like every week.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
just like every week, I guess we can get right into it. There was It's something that's come up. I've seen a lot of discussion on. There's a lot of these days. What I'm noticing is there's quite a few African American conservative voices, right? Political conservative voices, and a lot of times I've noticed that they have kind of the same talking points about basically attributing the condition of the African American community to the breakdown of the household, um, of the traditional household, the breakdown of the traditional family unit, and then reliance on welfare and things like that. And usually the conclusion is, we got to go Republican and out with the Democrats. I think one of the prominent voices that I was just listening to an interview of yesterday was this radio host turned politician from California, Larry Elder. And then there's a few others. I know you and I are in some WhatsApp groups where there's certain personalities have been shared, and I noticed that you have kind of a balanced approach. You're not for the wholesale endorsement of the right, and then you're also extremely critical of the left. So I wanted to ask your take on it. Like, first of all, are these right wing conservative black voices, are they wrong? Or is there a flaw to their argument? And what about the other side?
Yeah, I think it's a tremendous flaw in that argument. And it's not just conservative African Americans who are running to the Republican Party because they see something that is against their values or their belief system, particularly with the LGBTQ issue in the country right now. And it's unfortunate to me that that persons who are African American are using these right wing Republican talking points to try to justify why they have now Republicans rather than and have changed their party affiliation from Democrat to Republican. And I think this is very unfortunate. It's like puppets, and there's a puppeteer who is giving them the words to put in their mouth. And also, I have no doubt, I mean, I haven't seen any with my own eyes, any transfer of funds or monies, but uh, most of the time, these African Americans find themselves more enriched. They're either getting financial remunerance for the words that are coming out of their mouths, for their party affiliation, they're getting some material benefit. Or, as Malcolm had talked about, the house Negro and the field Negro, it may be that many of them are so self hating that just the affirmation that I look at you as a human being by white folks, maybe this is all they need. They don't need any material benefit. But to me, it's a very flawed kind of argument. And it's flawed on a number of different levels. But one of the most ludicrous levels of this party affiliation by conservative African Americans is that this period that we're living in right now is one of the worst expressions of Republican Party politics that I know that I've seen in my entire life. And I'm saying this as a son of the South and having lived through so many um, different reincarnations of the Republican Party over the years, particularly in the South. But I have never in my life, and I don't think anyone can say that they've seen a party that is not only racist and anti Black and anti immigrant, but it's also anti democratic. I mean, this uh, person, I guess he's a human being, but this person, Donald Trump, is espousing a rallying call that's bringing all of these Republicans to the point of being against the democratic process itself. Let's overturn the election. Let's gerrymander. I mean, gerrymandering and the lengths that these folks are going to try to disenfranchise, particularly African American people today, is just outrageous. We have a lieutenant governor here in North Carolina. I've forgotten what this guy did before he ran for office. It's an African American, last name Richardson. I can't remember his first name. And Richardson is one of I mean, it's kind of a minstrel buffoonery show that he does when he espouses all of these QAnon conspiracy theories and all these kinds of things. So right now, the package for the Republican Party is something that should be unattractive to any person of color that has any self-worth and value. I can understand. I'll give you another example. I had a brother that I've known for a lot of years, Muslim brother, approached me the other day and started talking about he was rationalizing Trump's behavior and his rhetoric. And he was saying that because he was a business owner, and all of the tax benefits that he would get from Republican policies in the name of his personal enrichment and keeping money that would normally be going to social services and just a lot of different things other than defense, that he was considering becoming a Republican. And I was really shocked to the point that I didn't even address it because it's just too long a conversation for someone who espousing the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and following the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to support any group of people who are uh, just so obviously racist, just anti-human being, anti-poor, just so to become a Republican, a black Republican at this point in history in the United States is, to me, it's an absurdity. It's something that cannot be justified, no matter how articulate the spokesperson for their newly found republicanism, you know, no matter how they can justify it, it's just it's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
But what would you, is there any merit to not the conclusion, but the underlying claim that I think one of the issues is that, with the argument is, well, look at all the progress that's been made, right? I mean, I don't have the exact statistics off the top of my head, but they say like around 1965 or 1970, the amount of African Americans living on or below the poverty line compared to today, where it's a massive difference, and you have all these black CEOs. But then again, drive through some of these neighborhoods like I'm familiar with here in Dallas or in Houston. I mean, yeah, you might have a good amount of African Americans who are living above the poverty line now, but there's still a lot of depressed communities, like economically depressed. And then you have the whole mass incarceration system. And uh the premise that I'm understanding, that I'm hearing, is, well, look, all of this goes back to Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson declared the war on poverty, and as one of these guys states, he said it basically made black women divorce their husbands and marry the government for that welfare check. Those are his exact words, right? And that is kind of like, that's what he's saying, that basically it's the destruction of the family unit. And then they have these statistics about how at a certain time the African American community, majority of the children were living with one or with both parents. We're living in a basically a stable household, whereas now in many of these poor communities of color, the households are broken up. So is there any, I mean, I think there is validity to that, but I think that is that really the cause, the Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty, or are there other factors that these people are conveniently ignoring?
Yeah, I think. the war on poverty, as declared by Lyndon Johnson, may be the lesser factor in the state of Black America today. As a matter of fact, I want to quote, one of my favorite guys, Malcolm X, and he was posed a similar kind of question, and his response when this black journalist was saying to him, Malcolm, there's been so much progress. We have a civil rights bill, we have all of these things now, and public accommodation and all of these things. And Malcolm used a brilliant analogy. He said that it's like a black person riding on an airplane, and he's sitting in the back of the plane, and the plane is going 500 miles an hour. And then the plane gets to a certain point and it starts going 1,000 miles an hour. Even though the plane has doubled its speed, you're still sitting in the back. And he gave other analogies that how we have to understand that even though African American people in particular, their material conditions has improved for some, look at how much the material condition of white folks have improved over the same period of time. And as you pointed out, the same kind of, like, give you another example, like in Chicago with the huge Cabrini Green uh, housing projects. These were just mammoth, almost skyscraper type public housing units, and they were all clustered together in Chicago. Eventually, those Cabrini Green was torn down, but the black folks' condition may have improved on the standpoint they're no longer living in these high rise rat traps. But now, but their material, their financial, their uh, weekly, monthly income in proportion to what the general or the white society is making, the gap, the income gap, the housing, and everything else is still in the back of the airplane. The society itself has advanced materially, but still at the bottom of the barrel, you find African American people, and this is just statistically borne out, even to the point that the wealth gap in the United States today, I've read a number of different numbers, but so I won't quote any one because I just haven't done the research to come to a firm conclusion. But I've read a lot of different numbers, and there've been a lot of quotes. But the wealth gap today is worse. It's the wealth gap between white folks and African American black folks is much greater today than it was in the 1960s under the system of segregation that we were living in prior to this. Um, the the legal separation, but so very little has changed in my humble opinion. No one wants to go back to this pre-legislation of the Johnson administration and others, president and state legislation. No one who wants to go back to that period. But by the same token, the wealth gap remains is even greater today than it was during the time of Lyndon Johnson and the subsequent presidents and other government officials.
Yeah, I think, and I think another thing is just this mass incarceration mammoth. I mean, uh, there's a middle school principal that we work with here in Dallas. She oversees a school that has students who live in 19 different low income housing projects. And when I was discussing this with her, she said and she calls her students her babies. She said a lot of my babies, they have only one parent at the house because the other parent's in prison. And she's like, if those get if and she knows a lot of these parents, and she said if they weren't in prison, then they'd be at home with their kids. It's just that, I mean, I feel like that's one of the things that these right people who are flocking to the right, I think that's one of the other things that they ignore. Like, if I a lot of people underestimate or they don't take into consideration a person's wealth has a lot to do with whether or not they get convicted for a crime or how well they do in court. Two
Yeah.
people can commit the same exact crime, and one can just afford a lawyer that can bury the district attorney in paperwork and can get them a good deal, whereas the other one has to rely on free counsel. Uh,
Yeah. These kind of, sorry to interrupt, but these kind of stereotypes perpetuate the myth of the lazy black man, or the black men don't care about their children, and they're running away from responsibilities and their duties. And I read a well researched article the other day, and it was talking about statistically, not counting those brothers that you have referenced, and I want to say something about this mass incarceration as well, not counting the African American men who are separated from their families by due to incarceration, but statistically, this particular research showed that take those off the table, and you will find that African American men in the United States of a certain age, I can't remember what the age was, statistically are more inclined to try to be in the life of their children, even compared to any other population. And so it's it perpetuates a stereotype of the lazy shiftlers, don't care about his family, African American man, this black man is just, he doesn't care about his family. That is a myth. And even when you go back historically and look at the lengths that black African slaves, that the lengths that they went to try to stay united with their family after this forced separation, just the total uh, illegitimate perspective that was given to black folks who got married, a man and woman got married, no respect by this chattel slavery enforcer, by Massa and Massa's henchmen who were enforcing the etiquettes of slavery upon black people at that particular time. But this issue of mass incarceration is another one of the major factors that has been imposed on the black community in this country, that has just far reaching implications. It is devastating to the social stability of black families in this country. But then when you look deeper, it becomes clear that this mass incarceration is a organized, targeted, deliberate attempt to re-enslave in a kind of modern day slavery black men. I mean, if we just, history is just so essential for us to understand where we are today. We have to know where we came from and how this whole thing called America and its social systems, how it evolved. And so uh, mass incarceration is no different than convict labor after the legal, on paper, abolishment of slavery in this country. Then it's just you come up with these black codes. You incarcerate black men for walking down the street or spitting on the sidewalk, and they're leased out to corporations. Some of the major financial institutions that we have today were beneficiaries of this convict labor in post slavery, chattel slavery days in the United States. And a lot of their wealth uh, was continued, not the way it was in slavery, but in some instances, it was cheaper to lease these people who had been unjustly incarcerated for their labor. It was cheaper to lease them to even have slavery. So it was a more financially efficient system. You didn't have to feed, you didn't have to do any of this stuff. You just work them to death, literally. and you just go and you just lease another one. And so we're seeing something very similar today with this mass incarceration. I don't think that for a moment we can even underestimate the targeting of the Black community for drugs, and how drugs cannot be underplayed as a major factor in the devastation and destruction of many in the Black community here in the United States. You know, uh, uh, it's unfortunate, but when we look at statistics, and when we look at the reality of the distribution of narcotics in the United States, there is there's no way that anyone can honestly come up with the conclusion that the Black community in this country was not targeted for the distribution of drugs. Let me give you a quick, very quick story here. Uh, when I went away to college, I don't know if I mentioned this in the podcast before. I probably mentioned it. I'm sure I mentioned it to you before. But when I went away to school, going from North Carolina to DC to attend Howard University, one of the reasons that I wanted to go to Howard, that just cleared it all together. I wanted to go to this school almost all my life, my conscious life. But what made it certain for me, because I had a few other offers, what it made a certainty for me was the activism that was going on. Like half of Northeast DC seemed to have been burnt down after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968. And I had a good friend who was a year ahead of me who was attending Howard. And he told me, he said, Griggs, uh, man, from my dorm, I can see part of the main campus, and they got uh, police or military up in Founders Library in the tower, which is the big library on campus, and they have a curfew, and they're shooting at the students because it's a curfew. They shouldn't be on campus, and these guys are literally shooting at these students. And so after he told me this, I got off the phone and I told my mother and father, I said, yeah, I'm certain now that I want to go to Howard University. And I can never forget, because of what I was being told about DC and the activism and the campus community there was on fire. And so when I never forget, my father made a wrong turn, maybe made a few wrong turns. And rather than going directly to Northwest, where Howard University was located, we went through a portion of Northeast that had been burnt out. I mean, 8th Street Northeast, it was like, what we're seeing in Maui today. Literally, this is what parts of Northeast looked like after the riots, and there was no attempt to try to rebuild these areas. But what caught my eye even more were the number of African American men and women, particularly men, who were slumped over in front of these burnt out buildings, all the way going up to Howard University. It was like a zombie. It was like a zombie movie. And what the socially conscious brothers, when I got on campus and, over the period, talking to people and hanging out with the Panthers, early on, starting in my freshman year, I didn't join, but hanging out with them, they were telling me that this drug dumping was to narcotize the Black community, that this is what derailed. It was a major factor in derailing the Black freedom struggle. Dump the dope in the community, and a whole different set of realities grow from this. And included in that is the destruction of the Black family. But at the time when this dope was targeted and dumped in the community, and there have been so many uh, uh, issues of documentation of this. I think of his name in a minute, but the big drug dealer on the West Coast, um, in San Francisco. He exposed, because he was their man. For some reason, I can't remember his name, but he was the man to dump heroin and then cocaine in the African American communities. He was the big guy. He was protected by the government on different levels to be the biggest distributor of these drugs in the black community. It's okay, make your money, but just keep it within the black community.
Yeah, I was trying to look up. Oh, Gary Webb.
Yeah, Gary Webb was the author that wrote about it.
Yeah,
Yeah, he wrote about it, but I can't remember the name of the there was an what for some reason I can't remember that. It'll come back to me, inshallah. That's what age
I
does
remember
for you.
Webb. I think yeah, Michelle Alexander had written had cited to had talked about the several people that had came out, CIA involvement and all that stuff. I mean, for
Yeah,
a long time, if you made a claim like that, you were called a conspiracy theorist and a
right,
kook, and then
right.
now it's fact, but it's. I mean, I think the a really big problem is that people literally just don't know about this stuff, even though I feel like 13th, which is a great film that covers this stuff, and then people, authors like Michelle Alexander, they've written about it, but I feel like it's still something that we don't pay attention to. uh you mentioned that dumping the drugs in these communities, and a lot of times in places like Cleveland and Pittsburgh, the drug dumping would occur at the same exact time that factories close down, and people are just hardworking family people are now out of work, and then you drop drugs into that community, vulnerable when they're vulnerable, and then you just throw the cops in there. Because if you look at all these statistics, I mean, you can even just think from your own anecdotal evidence, the drug usage is not restricted to one community. All communities use drugs, and but for some reason, the African American community and increasingly the Latino community, they're the people who are in jail for for the drug use, or drug related charges. And I think one of the things that people also underestimate and don't realize is when slavery ended, the U.S. economy collapsed, and then it was basically rebuilt. And if the mass incarceration system, if leasing out prisoners to do free labor, or labor at 30 cents an hour or whatever they get paid, if that stops today, the U.S. economy is going to collapse again. I mean, there's just so many markets are dependent on this. And one of the things that I think I've tried to do, but I feel like we haven't done enough, and we need to do a lot more of, is uh when in the Muslim community, when we are discussing the lives of the prophets, alayhi salatu wasalam, and especially two prophets in particular, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, the Prophet Moses. I feel like when we cover their lives, specifically with what they did, how they fought the injustice, and uh, in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in his example, how he basically dismantled the unjust system. In that lesson, we need to include this history lesson. I know that you've talked about it a few times, but if you could contextualize it, because you are a student of the Quran, and I know this is your eyes light up when you talk about the Bani Israel and the
Right.
Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So from that perspective, if someone who is a student of, if someone is visualizing this from that perspective, knowing the what Islam has imparted on us through the examples of the prophets, how they fought the oppressors and the tyrants, how they stood for the slaves and the masakin, with that perspective, where should the Muslim community in America be prioritizing fighting against this mass incarceration system?
That's a very good question, and is you that was an excellent commentary around the point that you were making. It's a very um, to me, I found it very disheartening to a certain degree for the years that I've been Muslim, to talk to many of my Muslim brothers and sisters, and they have absolutely no clue. Their imaginations, left alone, are not able to just create scenarios like what we're talking about. Like, how can you talk about the best country on the face of the earth? I mean, how can you be so upset when you have benefited from, what this country has to offer, and you know people in your family have benefited? So what are you upset about? And this is where it's so important that the lens that we look at our societies through must be through the lens of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. Like, He's given us Islam, not just for the Muslims, but it's for all of mankind. The Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being the Khatam Nabi'in, the seal of all of the prophets, his example was set. And as you said, as you so clearly, lucidly pointed out, that the role that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam played in the Meccan society, which was a blueprint that, in my opinion, all of us should take whatever, brain cells and intelligence that we've been blessed with to try to apply the same principles of opposition to oppression and just taking advantage of people that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. We have to embrace and adapt, not just how we pray or the methodology of fasting or Hajj, but if Islam is anything, it's about establishing a just society. And that just society begins with the individual. Don't oppress yourself. Don't be a self oppressor by doing things that are causing you first to incur the anger of Allah. And if Allah doesn't forgive you, you're going to be punished for this stuff. But also look through the lens of Islam and what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what all of the prophets did. They were not supporters and silent bystanders to oppressive systems. And what they got in trouble for doing is, like in Mecca, for as an example, Mecca, the most liberal city, probably, or city for religions, probably in the history of mankind. The Meccans didn't give a 2 cents. Whatever anybody wanted to worship, you want to worship a rock, stone, twigs, an elephant, whatever you want to worship, is okay, as long as you pay for the uh, privilege of putting what you're, as facsimile of what you're worshiping in or around the Kaaba. But so that was the root. Who are you? Whose guidance are you following? But the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet Musa in his time, they addressed the social condition of the people. It's very hard, if not impossible, for people to concentrate on higher ideals of life when they can't feed their baby. Their babies are crying, being bitten by rats, like they are in so many places in this country, literally. And we think that they're supposed to be able to overcome all of these things on their own and not recognize that when a racial, capitalistic, blood sucking system is imposed on the land, that those folks who are not a part of making the money, they're generating money through their almost free labor and all these other things, but they're not beneficiaries of all of the wealth and all of the advantages that come along, that should come along with living in a wealthy society. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, they address these issues. And then going back to an earlier point that we discussed this evening, look at the blueprint when Pharaoh, the Pharaoh at the time of Musa, and even before that time, a previous Pharaoh, when their scriptures were telling them that there's somebody going to come, arise from the Bani Israel, what did they do? Okay, first, just let's just get the oldest male from these families, right? Just take them out and then take out all of the males because they realize, these oppressors realize that if you remove the male from the society, and I'm not saying this from a chauvinistic standpoint, but it's a reality. If you take the man out of the household, take the man out of society, and they went to the extent, well, we don't need their labor, so we just gonna cut them out. We're gonna kill these dudes. A similar thing is going on in the society, American society today. And it is incumbent upon any of us, in my humble opinion, who say that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the last day, that we're following the sunnah, the tradition, the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to ignore the conditions. Let's look beneath the surface. What is the root cause? And in the Muslim community in America today, if our if it was our intention to get at the root cause of these bad conditions, living conditions and environments that we see in society today, it may mean that we'll lose favor with some of the people who are benefiting from this, the oppressive side of the system. I'm not trying to say by any means that this is a society that everybody should, go back to your home country or go somewhere else to leave. No, we are here. This is our country as much as anyone else. Blood, sweat, and tears have been invested. We have fertilized the ground with our dead bodies. We have fertilized the soil with the blood, our very blood in this country. So there's nowhere to go. This is our country. And I'm talking about the descendants of African people, and I'm talking about others who have immigrated to this country and recognize that I'm not here just to make money, that I'm here to to take the message of submission to Allah to the people of this land, that has to be a precondition of my work and my involvement, that I must understand that there are certain things that I must do as a Muslim, if I'm following the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if I'm following that instruction and guidance in the Quran that demands that we take a stand against injustice, that we speak out against it, we do whatever we need to do, but at least hate it in your heart and don't be a passive supporter of injustice. And I think by any evaluation, when you look at the racial capitalism and the militaristic combined with the militarism of this country, you have to say that, I don't know much, but I think something we can do better than what we're doing. And the doing better is the liberation of the minds and hearts of each other, starting with ourselves. The offering, the example of how Islam is a liberating force for the people, and it even liberates the oppressors, because now, rather than worshiping themselves and just trying to see what they can get, what they can drain from other people, now they are worshiping Allah, and they have a system of guidance to follow and to institute in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives us a lot to think about, and I think that's one of the things that we as a Muslim community need to prioritize a little bit more. Um, we can't make the excuse that we don't have the ability to do anything, because time and time again we've seen the Muslim community, you know, rise up and address certain things. We saw it with these unjust wars that were declared against the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. We've seen all these protests against Palestine, even though, I mean, despite our protests and our efforts, we're unable to, greatly impact the situation. But still, I mean, we're making the effort, right? We're doing what we can, and leaving it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even like in the latest, this wave of LGBTQ, this agenda that was a lot of parents were concerned about. We saw Muslims. I mean, I saw some amazing videos of these Muslim parents, men and women, you know, in places like Michigan, Maryland, and all these other places, going and addressing the school board. And I was like, I was very impressed by the Muslim community that, hey, these are, I've seen the Christian community respond, and I gotta say, like, some of our Muslims have even more well spoken and all that stuff.
Hmm.
But this just, so we have the capability, but this just doesn't seem like a priority for us. I mean, I haven't heard of one Muslim led or initiated mass protest against mass incarceration. I mean, we've tagged along to, a few of these protests, in the wave of like one of these unjust killings of these young black men that happens. We've seen some Muslims participate in that, but I think this is something that we need to prioritize. I'm hopeful after seeing the immense response from young people throughout the country on the Imam Jamil, the students for Imam Jamil situation. That we saw a lot of young people who were motivated by this. So I'm hopeful that this next generation of Muslims can be a little bit more. I don't want to say courageous, but uh, courageous to do something about standing against this mass incarceration. Um,
But before our time completely runs out, let me
yeah,
mention that I noticed that you have on a shirt that says Muslim Alliance for Black Lives, Mabel. And this is a group that we hope uh, to be able to be involved in trying to get the Muslim to help refocus the Muslim attention and to put different priorities and have priorities. As a matter of fact, I have something that I've written up that I haven't shared with anyone yet. Muslims against mass incarceration, and that I got to look at my notes because I wrote it a while ago. But I think that I would like to see Mabel, the Muslim Alliance Against Black Lives, to actually get involved and lead, not lead, but to at least help mobilize, be a mobilizing force in this particular area. It's very good that we attend to the needs of our brothers and sisters while they are incarcerated, but it takes
yeah,
more than that. We have to go beyond just supporting folks and oftentimes doing things that these various department of corrections should be doing anyway.
yeah,
So yeah, we got to go beyond that. So I'm with you 100% with that.
yeah. The problem is a lot of these conservative states, they believe in, I mean, in Texas, they very openly said, listen, our job is just to clothe, feed, house, and guard the prisoners, and if one of them escapes, shoot them. Our job isn't to rehabilitate them. That's the church's responsibility. And uh and and so I think that's a big problem. I think, in October, inshallah, when we start bringing on guests, the list of guests that we have obviously is a lot of people from Mabel. Definitely, I think, we have a lot of brothers who have done time on the inside and are very passionate and have a lot to share on this. So I think that's one of the things we can utilize this platform for, is giving a lot of these brothers, their story needs to be told. So inshallah, I think in October, when we start bringing on guests, that's one of the topics that for sure we'll visit. But
Absolutely.
so for now, I guess we can go ahead and close this thing out until next week. So
Okay.
jazakumullah khairan,
Wa
and
yakum.
assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.